What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Monday, September 9th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. I hope you all had a good weekend, good NFL DFS weekend, college football DFS, whatever you may have played. They were all shit for me, but hopefully they were better for you. But back to MLB today. Didn't play yesterday, did play on Saturday. Six-gamer, not huge prize pools, but we do have a $111 buy-in. $50K to first on DraftKings, $15, $25K to first. I am going to take a look on this show at how I would be playing the $15 if the slate were starting right now and I were playing 150 entries. So as usual, going to go through position by position and stack by stack, looking at how my exposures would look. There are multiple ways to approach slates like this. This is not the quote unquote right way, but I would like to think that at the very least, it is a good way to approach it. And I assume if you're watching, you probably agree, or you're just trying to figure out who not to play. Either one works as long as you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. All that stuff helps out quite a bit. Also, if you are playing NFL Showdown tonight, first, I did a show with Neil Orfield this morning. It is on the Endgame channel. It is also on his YouTube channel. Don't remember the name of it, or I would plug it, but it's his. That's on there if you want to see us breaking down that slate. Also, if you are interested in my showdown projections, optimal percentages, all of that stuff, you can get access to that through either of the links in the description below, either signing up for Endgame Syndicate, where all of my data and stuff is included, or signing up for my NFL Dub Club if the price for Endgame doesn't really make sense for your DFS play right now. You can just get access to my stuff for less using that link. So either way, that stuff is there for you. But getting into MLB, starting with pitching, Carlos Rodon showing up the most for me, showing up the most for the field as well. Projected for 46% ownership. Rodon is taking on Kansas City, so not a great strikeout matchup, but pitching on this slate is far from good. So that is driving Rodon up a bit. 26.7% K percentage, 4.14 xFIP on the season. There certainly is some risk in going to him, given that Kansas City is a solid offense and they don't strike out a lot. But you are getting them outside of Kauffman Stadium. Not that Yankee Stadium is a great place to pitch, but the Royals do strike out a little bit more on the road than they do at home. Also, Kauffman Stadium is one of the worst parks in baseball for getting strikeouts. Yankee Stadium, obviously, at least a little bit better. So mostly Rodon is showing up because of lack of alternatives on this slate. And the other pitchers on this slate that look good are also getting a lot of ownership. But, you know, he is a solid strikeout pitcher, even if he's not what he used to be. I know Jake DeWitt was in chat on the NFL show this morning asking me about stacking Kansas City against Rodon. I haven't looked yet to see if I'm getting there. I will say that even if I am not getting there, I do think it's a perfectly fine strategy on this particular slate. There's only 6 games. Kansas City's a solid offense, all of that. But either way, I clearly would also be playing a good amount of Rodon, showing up in 58% of the lineups that I would be playing right now. Moving this over here because I think that will make things a little bit easier. But yeah, as a reminder, if you're just looking and want to see how much I have of somebody, you can check the exposure column over here. Reed Detmers is showing up next for me at 35%. Relatively difficult strikeout matchup against Minnesota. Not a bad offense overall, but the game is in Minnesota, which is a park upgrade for Detmers. And even earlier this year, before he was demoted to AAA, he was still able to get strikeouts. Minnesota ranks 20th in K percentage against left-handed pitching on their active roster. Detmer so far this season, 26.7% K percentage, 3.94 xFIP. He had some bad starts earlier in the season, but it was pretty surprising when they demoted him, given one, that the Angels suck, and two, that there's a shortage of good starting pitching in baseball already as is. And Reed Detmers is certainly a major league pitcher, even if he's going to have his share of bad games here and there. His numbers this year haven't suggested that he should have been sent back to AAA. And on this particular slate and price tag and modest ownership at 25%, all things considered, I like getting to him quite a bit. So I'm a little over the field at 35%. David Festa on the other side of that game, 8,600. Good matchup for him going up against this Angels team. Their active roster against right-handed pitching this season ranks toward the bottom, 28th in WRC+. In strikeout percentage, they are 9th. So good strikeout matchup, bad overall offense. Festa, limited sample in the major league so far, but has struck out 28% of hitters, 3.27 xFIP. He's given up some power, but this park does help to mitigate that. and the Angels don't have a ton of it in their lineup anyway. 30.2% K percentage so far against righties, 28.2 against lefties. So in a limited sample, at least, we don't even have really big splits to worry about there, which is nice for him. So those are the three pitchers that are getting a lot. Three of the four pitchers that are getting a lot of ownership. Joey Cantillo is getting a lot as well at 6,200 for Cleveland. He is not showing up as often for me. He does have a good matchup here going up against the White Sox. I think he is a solid value play, but I am prioritizing getting to Rodon, Detmers, and Festa more. And then I do think that there are pivots you can make away from Cantillo, just because it's not like he's a great major league pitcher or anything like that. He pretty much is getting ownership just because he's cheap and he's facing the White Sox, which those are perfectly fine, valid reasons for rostering somebody. He did have a 29.8% K percentage at AAA this year, projects for a 22 to 23% strikeout percentage in the majors, depending on where you look. Some sites, actually, the bat has it higher at 25%. But either way, should be a solid strikeout pitcher. Probably not great overall at this point in his career, but also probably not bad either. I think he's fine. I do think he's underpriced. It's mostly just an ownership thing, though, where if you look at the projection column here, you can see I have Cantillo at 12 and a quarter DraftKings points. So I have him a little bit ahead of Cade Povich, a little bit ahead of Walker Buehler in similar price ranges, but a little bit more expensive. But the range of outcomes for those guys is going to be comparable, even though I do expect Cantillo to succeed more often than those other two. They're getting half the ownership though, and so that is a spot where on a 6-game slate, it is going to push down how much Cantillo I get a little bit and push up those other two a little bit. You can see here that basically I've kind of just flipped the ownership in this group where Buehler is the middle guy for the field and for me, but I'm playing Povich at a rate similar to how the field's playing Cantillo, and then I'm playing Cantillo at a rate similar to how the field is playing Povich. I think that's perfectly fine in large field tournaments. Again, if you ask me which one I think is the quote-unquote best play as far as just who has the best chance of succeeding, I do think it's Cantillo, but I don't think he's 2-1 against either one of these guys, even though I have huge concerns about both of them. It is obviously a very, very difficult spot for Cade Povich going into Fenway Park. Boston has a 5+ implied run total, pretty much neck and neck with the O's and the Yankees for the highest on the slate. It is not a safe spot, but Cade Povich, did have a lot of success at AAA this year. He has had a few good starts in the majors so far overall through his first 12 major league starts. Very, very mixed results. 17% strikeout percentage, 9.5% walk percentage, 5.03 FIP. But he projects for around the 22% strikeout percentage going forward, around the 4.5 FIP. If those numbers sound familiar, it's because I just said the same exact thing about Joey Cantillo. So you're basically getting two pitchers that project to be similar talent levels. One is half the ownership or even less than half the ownership solely because of the matchup / park, which, again, matchup and park is obviously a relevant factor. All things equal, you would prefer the guy in the better matchup and better park, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Povich is or that Cantillo is 2.5 times as likely to succeed. Jake asked anything about pitch data for Povich here. I don't have any for him just because of the sample size. I haven't loaded him in. Boston in general is a team that will strike out, but also has a lot of power. Their active roster ranks 15th in WRC plus against left-handed pitching since the start of last season, but they also rank 4th in strikeout percentage. That can be a little bit misleading because they are a platoon-heavy team. So generally, that when you look at something like that, it's including guys that aren't going to be getting the lefty-lefty matchup. No Yoshida in their lineup, no Abreu in their lineup. The benefit for somebody like Povich or a left-handed pitcher in general is that I would rather be facing guys like Romy Gonzalez, Rob Refsnyder, than Abreu and Yoshida from a talent standpoint. But it does just get more right-handed bats in the lineup. Povich has struck righties out 19% of the time so far in the majors, only 13% to lefties. He does have a changeup. He throws 14% of the time. Curveball, he throws 27% of the time. Those are both pitches that do tend to have more success against opposite-handed hitters than left-handed hitters or same-handed hitters. So, could be a reverse splits guy going forward. I don't think that he's going to be bad against righties. So at that price, I think he's fine, but I don't have anything specifically pitch data-wise to make me like or dislike him. Walker Buehler going up against the Cubs. Buehler far from what he used to be, but still on a 6-game slate at 7K. I'll take some shots on him. He is not getting strikeouts like he used to. He's getting hit harder than he used to. It's not an easy matchup against the Cubs. It's a pitcher or a hitter-friendly park, but it's a 6-game slate. 18% strikeout percentage for Buehler so far this season, pretty much in line with the field. So that's pretty much where you're looking for value with Povich, Buehler, Cantillo. And then you have Singer, Bello, McGill, all guys that are competent, but all in pretty difficult matchups as well. Field is getting to Singer around 15%. So am I. Bello showing up around 8% for the field, around 7% for me. And then McGill only showing up in 2% of my lineups, about 12% of the field's lineups. I think basically what you're seeing there is that I'm just turning more McGill into Detmers, which if you have lineups that are really popular with bats, I think it's fine to, play McGill at lower ownership in those lineups. But I do have Detmers projected a couple points better, and it is a tough strikeout matchup for McGill against a Blue Jays team that ranks 24th in K percentage against right-handed pitching. Bello, obviously a tough matchup against Baltimore. He's not a bad pitcher, but the Orioles do rank 20th in K percentage against right-handed pitching. They do have a 113 WRC plus, which is tied for 7th. No Jackson Holliday in the lineup for the Orioles. Livan Soto, not the same sort of power threat or upside threat as Jackson Holliday, but Holliday being on the bench does take a year-to-date 34% strikeout percentage out of the Orioles lineup. So kind of been a free strikeout at the bottom of the order, not to the same extent as when he was first called up, but still striking out a lot. So that's a slight negative, I think, from a strikeout standpoint for Bello. But, if you want to get to him at low ownership, I think it's fine. Clearly a tough matchup, though. Singer, 8,300, also a very tough matchup against the Yankees. I am a little surprised that he's getting 15% ownership, that he's getting twice the ownership of Bello, and also that I'm not attacking that more. I have very similar projections on them. I'm a little surprised that I'm not just kind of coming in around like 12% on both and getting a little bit over on Bello, a little bit below on Singer. But either way, I think they're pretty similar plays. Singer comes into the game with a 22.6% strikeout percentage. Bello's at 22%, 3.57 xFIP for Singer, 3.78 for Bello. Do keep in mind with Singer, though, that even though we think of Yankee Stadium as a great home run park, and it is good for hitting home runs, this is an improvement as far as strikeout environment for Singer compared to where he pitches his home games. So that is something to keep in mind. Also, looking at the stacks that I am getting to the most, Cleveland showing up at the top 37% of the time. They are in a very, very good spot. And keep in mind, this is all stack types, not just 5-mans, but very good spot. Highest implied run total on the slate. Bullpen game, kind of, for the White Sox. Jared Schuster opening, Nick Nastrini expected to follow him. Nastrini is not very good, and he is stretched out. So while bullpen games aren't the most appealing thing to target, I do think a bullpen game like this is a little bit more appealing than your just standard everybody pitches 1 or 2 innings bullpen game, because you are likely to get a few innings from Nastrini, and he is not a good pitcher. So the Guardians should be able to take advantage of that for multiple innings. Makes them look very good. Boston, getting to them, even though I'm also getting to Povich. Perfect spot to, if you're playing multiple lineups, just have both sides of it. It's a very high upside spot for the Red Sox. It's a high upside spot for Povich. So I'm fine with that one. You do want to keep in mind that there is pinch hit risk for Red Sox hitters overall. The righties that I was mentioning, that aren't usually in the lineup, are pretty likely to get subbed out later on. The Orioles have 2 left-handed relievers in their bullpen, Keegan Aiken and Gregory Soto. Aiken pitched yesterday, but didn't pitch the 3 previous games. Soto didn't pitch yesterday, so they'll both be available. They do also have Cole Irvin as a long reliever who's left-handed. He's not likely to be somebody that comes in the middle innings, but if Povich gets in trouble, they'll probably go to Irvin. But obviously, they have righties in their bullpen that will match up with Refsnyder and Gonzalez. So I think those are the 2 biggest guys that have pinch hit risk. Like Tyler O'Neill isn't going anywhere. Duran and Devers are left-handed and starting, so it doesn't matter. Connor Wong probably not getting pinch hit for. Trevor Story probably not getting pinch hit for. Danny Jansen not getting pinch hit for, I wouldn't think, especially with Connor Wong playing first base. Rafaela probably not getting pinch hit for. I guess they could pinch hit for like Jansen and then move Wong to catcher and bring in a different first baseman. I do think that they have less pinch hit risk, though, than Gonzalez or Refsnyder. But overall, very high upside spot for them. Dodgers, 5.5 implied run total in Dodger Stadium. That's going to look pretty good. Dodgers offense, obviously happy to get to them. They're expensive, but good matchup against Hendricks. The White Sox on the other side against Cantillo. This is the first team, as far as stacks go, that isn't in a great spot. They're obviously not a good offense, but you do have 25 to 30% of the field likely to roster Cantillo against them. And Cantillo is just kind of a run-of-the-mill guy. So you do get negative correlation on a short slate going up against him. Hopefully, Vaughn, Robert, the competent hitters in this lineup can do some damage. You do have Corey Julks leading off, which is nice. Corey Lee batting fifth at 2,600. Value option at what's always a pretty weak catcher position. So they look fine, all things considered in tournaments. And then pretty flat here with the Cubs, Kansas City, Minnesota, Baltimore, the Angels, Mets, and Toronto showing up down at the bottom. A lot of Cleveland 5-man stacks, so it doesn't look like I'm really having trouble with the ownership there either. Maybe that's another reason that Kate Povich is showing up so much for me. If I'm going to what I assume is a pretty popular Cleveland team as far as 5-mans, then you have the option to go to like Povich, save some ownership compared to Cantillo. Kansas City, Boston, Chicago showing up as 5-mans as well. So that is where I am getting some negative correlation. Kansas City, my second most used 5-man stack. I think the idea there is basically to, if you are going to negatively correlate against Carlos Rodon, I just want all of it. I want to just get to this Kansas City team. Rodon's not very good at holding runners. We know that this park does give up home runs. So if you're going to bet on Rodon having a bad game in a specific lineup, you may as well just go all the way and get to these Kansas City bats. The Cubs going up against Buehler. Like I said, Buehler's not a good pitcher. He's just relatively good in the context of this slate. But getting to the Cubs on the other side of him against his 15% or so ownership is going to look pretty good in that park. Moving over to position by position, starting at the top with David Fry, batting second, 3,600. Very, very obvious, just good value play here. I'm really surprised he's not projected for more ownership. Maybe that will come up by the time we get to lock. Maybe not, but only projected for like 10% ownership right now. And he's on the offense with the highest implied run total. He's got good matchup. He is somebody that maybe could get pinch hit for later on in the game, but I kind of doubt it. He is DHing, which isn't ideal. Like, I guess that's the biggest risk with Cleveland, other than they could just not do well because hitting's hard. But when you have Schuster, who's a lefty, opening the game, and then the right-hander Nastrini coming in behind him, like maybe Cleveland's planning on just pinch hitting for Fry after an at-bat or two, but he's a good enough hitter that I'm not expecting that to happen. Hopefully it doesn't, since I'm clearly playing a lot of him. Same kind of thing with Lane Thomas. He's batting fifth. He is somebody that generally doesn't play against right-handed pitching, so maybe they pinch hit for him pretty quickly. So that there is some risk there. I think more so for Thomas than for Fry, but that is something to keep in mind. But I'm getting the Fry a lot. 3,600 batting second, especially at low ownership. I'm willing to take that chance. If he were like 20-25% owned, then I think I'd be a little bit more inclined to say, what if he does only get a couple at bats here? But at modest ownership, I still like getting there. Danny Jansen hitting eighth, but only 3,200 on a team with a high implied run total. He looks pretty good. Right around the field on Ryan Jeffers. Salvador Perez showing up 10% for me. He's getting 8% ownership. I most likely am over the field, considering that he's in 10% of my lineups just at the catcher position. Bo Naylor, I'm a little over the field. 3K at catcher, again, on Cleveland. And then pretty flat with the rest of these guys. Oh, I was looking at the wrong column. That makes a lot of sense. So this makes more sense. David Fry, 15% projected ownership. I was looking at my projection column and really confused why he was only 10% owned. 25% makes more sense. So I'm a little below the field on Fry, but still getting a lot of him. Everything I said is still true. I'm a little bit more concerned about maybe them pinch hitting for him now that he's 25%, but I still think he clearly looks like a very, very good play. Bo Naylor showing up 12%, and then everybody else 10% or less. Of the relatively popular catchers, Will Smith looks like the guy that I am not getting to. Everybody else, I'm pretty close to the field. JNC said, where do we get the software you are using? This is SaberSim. You can go to their site, sign up for it. Couldn't tell you how much it is. I don't remember. But this is what I use. I recommend it if you're looking for an optimizer or Sims tool. I think it's great. You can do a lot of different things with it. So definitely, if you do sign up for it, spend some time learning about it, going in their Discord, asking questions, all of that. But I think it's great. I've used it ever since their Sims tool came out last summer. Been very happy with it. So do recommend it if you're looking for an optimizer or Sims tool. Moving over to first base, now that I have ownership where it usually is, Josh Naylor out the top for me, 23% of my lineups, 20% for the field. So I am pretty much in line with the field there. He's getting the start, lefty. I'm not worried really about that. And then he's going to have the platoon advantage later on against Nastrini. So that's going to look really good. Yuli Gurriel back from the dead, 13% of my lineups. Field's only at 5%, $2,300 price tag. Not a great power hitter or anything like that, but just a really cheap price tag. Batting sixth negatively correlates with Rodon. So in Kansas City lineups, no reason not to be getting to Gurriel. A little below the field, but pretty close on Freddie Freeman. Those are the three first basemen I have 10+% of. And then I'm kind of just mixing and matching. Ohtani, 9% of my lineups at first base. I assume I have more in the outfield. Vaughn, Santana, Shamuel, Bush. These guys, all look fine. I actually don't have Salvador Perez much at first base, which makes sense. Like, ideally, you're playing him at catcher. It's a weaker position, less opportunity cost, all of that. So that does make sense. I would prefer having him at catcher. JNC said it's kind of like Fantasy Cruncher. Yeah, it's kind of. So, like, Fantasy Cruncher is an optimizer. SaberSim has an optimizer function. It also has a simulation function that Fantasy Cruncher never had. Second base, Romy Gonzalez. I'm getting a lot of him. Again, I am concerned about the pinch hit risk here. The field's getting to 18%. I'm getting to 18. I'm actually going to double check and make sure that I have some sort of pinch hit adjustment on him, because I do think it's likely that he ends up getting pinch hit for, and I don't. I didn't when I built these lineups. So that is something I'm going to change between now and lock, is for whatever reason I accidentally didn't make an adjustment to him for pinch hit risk. I don't think he's likely to finish this game out. And so it is a spot where if you're going to Boston, fine, but there is a good chance that by the end of the game, you just have a 5-man stack that became like a 4-man stack or a 3-man stack, depending on who else you had in it. And so you can actually get a leg up on the field potentially when you're talking about a popular stack like Boston by just not having the pinch hit guys, because somebody like Romy Gonzalez at 3K batting fifth projects really, really well. But it's not, when you think about it from a range of outcome standpoint and you run Sims and all of that, it's not factoring in that he doesn't have the full distribution of his range of outcomes, because he's likely to not be getting at bats at the end of the game. And so it kind of creates a false distribution of his fantasy points that doesn't really exist if you're expecting him, or think, at least there's a good chance he gets pinch hit for. And they do have Nick Sogard, who's a switch hitter, on their bench. They have Emmanuel Valdez, who's a left-handed middle infielder, on their bench. There's just a good chance that he's not playing second base at the end of this game. So I do think that's something I'll adjust. Not saying I won't play him at all, but I will probably end up playing less than this once I make that adjustment. So glad I saw that. That's one reason that I like doing these shows, is it does let me catch some stuff before I make mistakes. Andres Jimenez, right with the field. That seems to pretty much be what is going on with me in Cleveland. I'm not really taking a stand one way or the other. I do think they're the top stack on the slate, but I think the ownership is pretty much where it should be too. I don't think there's a lot to exploit there as far as, the field being too low on them or anything like that. Sosa, 8%, 9% of my second base lineups. Negative correlation against Cantillo. I assume I have a bit more at third base also, paying down for Brooks Lee. So I think the big takeaway for me at third base is that I am using it as a value position. The names obviously can change between now and lock, and probably will, second base rather. But paying down for Gonzalez, Jimenez, at 4,100, not really paying down, but paying down for Gonzalez, paying down for Drury, batting cleanup, paying down for Sosa, paying down for Brooks Lee, Will Wagner. I'm saving money at second base. Not that there are a ton of pay up options anyway, but I am clearly using that as a spot to pay down. The field is mostly doing that also. Chris Taylor, 2,900, 14% owned for the field, only in 3% of my lineups at second base. Not very surprising there, because for one, I wasn't getting to Will Smith much at catcher. So that makes me think that I'm just not getting to the Dodgers as much as the field is in general. And then for two, Chris Taylor does have some power, some stolen base upside. He is a bit more volatile than your typical $2,900 value play, but still, whenever you get these guys at the bottom of the order that are popular, I tend to just find bottom of the order or cheap guys that aren't as popular, and that's perfectly fine. Same can be said for Kyle Farmer here. Will Wagner obviously has some power upside. batting fifth, but I'm not quite getting to the field on him either. Moving over to third base, paying up here for the most part. Max Muncy showing up for me a lot, so this is a Dodger I am getting to. 23% of my lineups, 14% projected ownership for the field. I obviously like that a lot in this park. We know Muncy has power. 4,800 is a reasonable salary. 208 expected ISO, allowed 2 left-handed hitters for Hendricks this year. Only a 15% strikeout percentage against them as well. Muncy hasn't been healthy for most of the season. Only 161 plate appearances against right-handed pitching. But he does have a 238 expected ISO against them. And while I don't care really about a 161 plate appearance sample size, I do think that's important to note because we have sort of seen over the last couple of seasons some power outages from Muncy where he'll really struggle to hit the ball hard for a while. Usually it's injury related. But this year he has still been putting up good, expected power numbers. If you go back to the start of last season overall, he has a 277 expected ISO against right-handed pitching. So I do like getting to him a lot. I like getting to Ramirez any time that I can, but especially here, basically the same amount as the field in the good matchup against the White Sox. Kobe Mayo, I'm saving some money. Field's getting 5%. I have 8. I don't love him here. Righty-righty matchup going up against Brian Bayo. Bayo is a solid pitcher. Mayo has struggled to adjust to major league pitching so far, but this is a prolific power hitting prospect in Fenway Park, not getting a lot of ownership, and he's cheap. This is like the perfect example I was just talking about with Chris Taylor, where Taylor does give you a little bit more stolen base upside and power upside than your typical sub 3K hitter, but he's getting like 2 to 3 times the ownership of Kobe Mayo, and Kobe Mayo's got more power than Taylor. Taylor, obviously has been hitting major league pitching for much, much longer than Mayo, but from just a pure range of outcome standpoint and volatility standpoint, Kobe Mayo has it at a fraction of the ownership. So I like getting to him, especially if we're talking as like a one-off or mini stack. If you're in a 5-man Dodger stack, then Chris Taylor makes a lot of sense. But outside of those, if let's say I'm just stacking the Guardians and for whatever reason that stack doesn't have Jose Ramirez, I would much rather be going to a low-owned one-off in Kobe Mayo than a more popular one-off in Chris Taylor, for example. Isaac Paredes, same kind of thing, not cheap, but 4,400 going up against Walker Buehler. I like him as a one-off. I like him in Cub stacks, obviously. Should be hitting in the middle of that order. Buehler has given up a lot of power this year. He hasn't gotten a lot of strikeouts, like I was mentioning earlier, only striking out about 18% of hitters. 255 actual ISO allowed by Buehler to righties this year. 221 expected ISO, only a 15% K percentage. I think that Isaac Paredes looks pretty good here given the ownership. Rafael Devers, I'm a little surprised, is only getting 6% ownership, but he's also only showing up 7% for me. Probably has to do with the lefty-lefty matchup. But like I was saying before, it's too early to say that I think Cade Povich has reverse splits, but he does have the type of stuff that makes me think he's probably not going to be dominant against lefties. He has only struck them out 13% of the time this year. 167 expected ISO is fine, but it's not like he's been lights out there in a limited sample. Devers hits everybody well anyway, so I do think he makes sense not only in Boston lineups, but if you are stacking a team that doesn't have a strong third baseman, for example, going to Devers at a quarter of the ownership of Jose Ramirez makes a lot of sense because while Ramirez is the higher projected option, he's the quote unquote better play. He's never 4 times better than Rafael Devers from a chances of success, range of outcome standpoint. So I like Devers individually and in stacks as a GPP play. And this is also a really good example of what I was just saying with Romy Gonzalez, where if you stack Boston and find a way to get to Rafael Devers, not only is he just somehow a kind of contrarian way to stack Boston today, because people are stacking Boston for the value more so than the top end guys, or at least than Devers, lefty. But like you're gonna have people playing Romy Gonzalez at third base because he's 3K at like twice the frequency of Devers. So not only are you contrarian within that Red Sox stack because you have Devers, but let's say innings like 6, 7, 8, 9, you can still have all of your Red Sox hitters as opposed to your opponents that stack the Red Sox and are losing Gonzalez, losing Ref Snyder. If you go with like the more expensive stack, find a way to get to Duran plus Devers plus O'Neill and then like Story Jansen or something like that, Story Raffaello, whatever it may be. you can still use some value from this team. But if you can get to those more expensive bats, I think it's going to be a really good way actually to stack the Red Sox. Then, kind of just mixing and matching the rest of these guys. Royce Lewis, high upside bat, pretty much even with the field. Mark Vientos, a little bit below the field there, going up against the Blue Jays in Toronto. So it is a good park for right-handed power for Vientos. I do like the upside that he offers. It is a bullpen game for the Blue Jays as well. It seems likely, so you're getting Ryan Burr to open, and then it seems likely that you're going to get Ryan Yarbrough behind him, but that isn't set in stone. You could get another reliever before Yarbrough. We have seen the Blue Jays be kind of cagey with how they do that. So between the two bullpen games here, the White Sox and the Blue Jays, I do prefer the matchup against the White Sox to the matchup against the Blue Jays. One, because I think that it's likely Nastrini is just immediately after Schuster. And Yarbrough could be immediately after Burr also, but I think it's more likely that Nastrini is than Yarbrough is. Also, Yarbrough, I think, just a better pitcher than Nastrini. So that's not that the Mets aren't still good plays, but like Mark Vientos' first at bat here is going to be against Ryan Burr, which isn't ideal. Then maybe his second at bat is against Yarbrough if they go straight to him. But one way or the other, I am getting a bit less than the field, even though he is getting a nice park upgrade as far as home runs go. Miguel Vargas, I'm slightly over the field at 4%, 2,300, batting eighth. Obviously, nothing I'm prioritizing there. Field is getting to Ramirez the most, followed by Gonzalez, Taylor, Muncy. So I already talked a lot about those guys. Very happy to see that I am getting a lot of the good ones and not a lot of the bad ones. That always, makes me feel pretty good. At shortstop, Bobby Witt Jr., my highest owned shortstop, Fields at 10 to 11%. So he's getting some ownership, more than most Kansas City guys, as he always should. But I really, really like him in this spot. Not only is he getting a park where it is easier to hit home runs, but the stolen base matchup against Carlos Rodon is very, very good. Bobby Witt, we know, will try and run on pretty much anybody, but he's very likely to have success against Rodon if he gets on base against him. So I really like the spot for Bobby Witt Jr. I like him as a one-off, even in non-Kansas City stacks. In general, like I was saying, I think that a lot of my Kansas City exposure is going to be limited or within Kansas City stacks. But Bobby Witt Jr., I don't really care who I'm stacking. If I need a shortstop and have the salary, absolutely love getting to him in the spot. Trevor Story is back in the lineup for the Red Sox. He's only 3,600, 15% of my lineups, 11% for the field. He's too cheap for the skill set that he has. Obviously, there's a rust factor here. We don't know what to expect from Trevor Story in the short term. He's missed most of the season, but he is a guy that can steal bases. He is a guy that has power. He is hitting in Fenway Park. The fact that he's hitting seventh does keep his ownership down a little bit, I think. If he were hitting, fourth or fifth, he would just be a lot more popular. But I like the upside that you get at that salary. And then we're going back to paying up with Gunnar Henderson against Bayo. 14% of my lineups, 8 to 9% of the field. He hasn't been as good a hitter in the second half, but I think it's important to keep in mind that he's still been a good hitter overall. He just was having an unbelievable first half, and he's taken a step back. But last I had looked in the second half, still had like a 122 WRC plus. He has seemingly been coming back into it, into a groove recently. He's homered a couple of times of late. Also was robbed over the wall on a 3-run home run a couple days ago as well, which, of course, doesn't show up in his stats, but he hit it really well. 157 WRC plus overall this season. So I do like getting to him here. Brian Bayo does typically struggle more against left-handed hitters as well. He has a 25.3% K percentage, 117 expected ISO allowed to righties this year. Very, very good numbers there. Only an 18.9% K percentage, 177 expected ISO to lefties. So it's not that he's horrible against lefties, but significantly worse against lefties than righties, which does make sense when you are primarily a sinker ball pitcher. He does have a changeup that he's thrown 38% of the time to lefties also, but just not as successful against those left-handed bats. So that looks good for Henderson. Bayo's also not been good at holding runners. Henderson's not the same level of base stealer as Bobby Witt Jr., but he will run a bit. And this is a spot where if he gets on, I would expect him to try, especially also the Orioles offense has just been dog shit lately. They're really, really struggling. I would expect them to maybe start trying to make things happen outside of hitting home runs because most of them are really struggling to do that of late. So you could also see them just start being more aggressive on the bases, and that's something that would probably start with Gunnar. You also, on a side note, haven't gotten to the outfield yet, but just speaking of stolen bases, you have Cedric Mullins hitting second here for the Orioles as well. He is somebody that I would fully expect to look to run if he's on base. And maybe this lineup signals that also, just a change in trying to make things happen. I think it's probably just kind of shaking up the lineup because they've not been very good. You dropped Rutschman to fifth. He hasn't been hitting well for the last couple of months, but you do also now have two of your best speed guys at the top of this order with Henderson and Mullins. So maybe some more stolen bases starting to come for the Orioles too. Brian Rocchio, 13% owned, 13% for me. Just a value punt at the bottom of what is likely to be a high-scoring Cleveland stack. Dansby Swanson, I like getting 2x the field, basically going up against Buehler. He gives you stolen base upside. He gives you power upside. He is certainly somebody where if Buehler is struggling, he's one of the first Cubs I would want to get to because of the fact that he's good at both of those things. Walker Buehler also has not been good historically at holding runners. Dansby Swanson will likely take advantage of that if he gets on. I'm about half the field on Francisco Lindor, so kind of just looks like the Mets are a semi-popular team that I'm not getting a lot of. This is just a perfect example of what I said at the top of the show, where this isn't the right way to play tournaments. There's a million different ways you can go. You can find ways for pretty much any player to be in a good lineup. This is not me telling you Francisco Lindor is a bad play or you shouldn't play him. It is me telling or showing you that I am prioritizing getting to Bobby Witt, getting to Gunnar Henderson over Francisco Lindor. There's only so many ways I can pay up at shortstop. I am essentially playing Witt and Gunnar at the same rate that the field is likely to play Lindor, and I'm playing Lindor at the same rate the field is likely to play Witt and Gunnar. And that makes sense to me. They have very, very similar ranges of outcomes. So seeing it work out like that is kind of exactly what I would like to see. As far as where the field is going, Lindor, Rocchio, again, Kyle Farmer showing up a lot. Value bat for Minnesota, going up against Detmers. I think he's fine. It does negatively correlate with a 25% on Detmers, but I'm a bit over the field on Detmers and seemingly just a bit under the field on Minnesota as well, which I'm not too upset about given that park or matchup. But Detmers does give up some power, 1.3 home runs allowed per 9 this year. It is a park upgrade for him as far as power goes, but going to Farmer there is fine. There is pinch hit risk for him as well as a right-handed, kind of platoon bat against Detmers. Finally, wrapping things up in the outfield. I don't know why my voice just cracked like that or what just happened, but that hurt my ears. I can't imagine how bad that sounded to you guys, so sorry about that. Lane Thomas showing up in 28% of my lineups, 23% of the fields. Double checking this one too, because I have a feeling this might be just like Romy Gonzalez and that I screwed up on adjusting for his pinch hit risk. I have him with like no pinch hit risk right now. I think he has more than 0. So I am going to be lowering my projection on him at least a little bit. I don't know that will change a ton for me. He is a good defensive outfielder. He is playing center field. So that does, lower pinch hit risk at least a little bit here. 4K batting 5th. Like he looks like a good play. I do just think it's important, just like I was saying with Fry, keep in mind that there's a non-zero chance you get absolutely screwed by these guys. But I still think it's more likely than not that they at least get a few plate appearances. Maybe late in the game, if it's competitive and a right-handed reliever is in, maybe then you get a left-handed pinch hit order. I would hope, and I think it's most likely that the Guardians aren't going to burn their pinch hitters as soon as Nastrini comes into the game. One, because that's just like a really inefficient use of your pinch hitters early in the game. And also because Nastrini sucks. Like Lane Thomas can handle Nick Nastrini. David Fry can handle Nick Nastrini. So I still think that it's pretty likely that these guys stay in, but just wanted to call attention to that. Shohei Ohtani showing up a lot for me in the outfield. 7K price tag is an absurd price tag, but obviously he has earned it, potentially stealing 50 bases and hitting 50 home runs. So I am over the field on him. I don't remember, like 10% at first base. I have 23% in the outfield. So that does get me a little bit above the field and never going to be upset about that. Going up against the pitcher in Hendricks, it just isn't very good anymore. Seiya Suzuki, I like. Basically the same thing as Dansby Swanson. 2x the field on one of the best power hitting bats in the Cubs lineup, going up against a pitcher in Buehler that's just giving it up to both sides of the plate this year in a park that is great for hitting home runs. I actually am just a little bit surprised that the Cubs aren't getting more ownership, given just that Walker Buehler is not what Walker Buehler used to be. Maybe it's just a function of, good projection systems are always incorporating data from beyond the current season for sample size reasons and all of that. Maybe it's just a case of, a lot of the industry still projecting Buehler to be a bit better than he actually is. But one way or the other, the Cubs are in a very high upside spot here. They're not getting much ownership. I like them quite a bit. Noel, another right-handed bat for Cleveland that does have some pinch hit risk. I think he probably has more than Thomas or Fry, just because he is starting in right field. He's not a good defensive player, so he'd probably be the one that they prioritize getting out. But still, you're probably talking more late in the game than early, I would hope. There is power here. He is 4,200, pretty much around the field there. Tommy Pham, double the field, leading off for Kansas City. Not a great hitter, but does have some power, 3,700. He'll probably try and run on Rodon if he gets on also, I would think. So I like that. I like Ian Happ at 4,600. Corey Julks leading off 2,900. Going up against the lefty Cantillo, basically getting no ownership. Value bat that also negatively correlates with the field. I really like getting to those in general. Cedric Mullins, a little over the field. I mentioned him a minute ago. Fully expect him to steal if he gets on base. He did also get a lineup bump. I did not expect him to already be $4,600. I kind of assumed I was going to look and he was going to be like 37 or 38. So that does make him less appealing than he would have been. But still, I like him. I like Luis Robert at 5% owned, negatively correlating. So getting some low owned outfielders here, which isn't always the case. Outfield is a position where a lot of times I'm kind of with the field because a lot of times it's going to be the best hitters on the best teams. And in some cases, I am playing popular outfielders, but I think we have some big power upside at low ownership in the outfield tonight, which is pushing up some pretty low owned guys as well. Cody Bellinger being another one that I'm like 2x the field on. As far as the guys that I'm not getting to that are popular, Stephen Kwan, 18% ownership. I'm only getting the 7%. I think he's a really good play. I wouldn't mind getting more of him. I would actually feel better if some of this Lane Thomas turns into Stephen Kwan. And I think there's a good chance it will. You can see here I actually have a little bit higher projection on Thomas than Kwan, probably because of the lefty-lefty matchup, but it's like a fake lefty-lefty matchup because Schuster's not going to stay in the game. So I do think that I'm going to, or not think, I am 100% between now and lock going to be increasing the projection on Kwan and slightly decreasing the projection on Lane Thomas. So I do think there's a chance that this might flip where like Lane Thomas is the Cleveland outfielder that I'm not playing as much of, and I'm playing a lot of Kwan. But either way, if that kind of ends up working out like that, or if I end up kind of at 16, 17% on both, that's fine. But I do want to say that, whether or not I end up playing Kwan, I do think he's a good play. He's been hitting for a lot more power this year, which has always been the knock on him in the past. And this is a really good $4,400 price tag. I'm not really getting to Starling Marte. I'm not really getting to Brandon Nimmo. Same kind of thing. If you want to play the Mets, great. They're in Toronto. They're in Rogers Center. It's a nice home run upgrade. It's an okay matchup for them. They have an implied run total that's similar to the Yankees, the Orioles, the Red Sox, a little bit below the Dodgers and Guardians, but from a range of outcome standpoint, same ballpark. If you want to play them, fine. I'm just kind of getting to other teams over them. I'm prioritizing Cleveland over them. I'm prioritizing Boston and Baltimore over them, and I don't have any issues with that either. It's kind of just a preferences thing, how things are working out. They're also just getting more ownership, for example, than a team like Baltimore. Ref Snyder, I am a little bit below the field. I am happy with that one. I'm going to guess that I actually had the right pinch hit number in for him, and that's why he is not showing up as much. Nope, still don't have him getting pinch hit for either. So not sure why any of that is happening, but also will be lowering that a little bit. But it goes back to my overall point. Ref Snyder certainly can do damage in his first couple of at-bats against Povich. He's 3,700. He's in a good park. He's a good point per dollar value play, all of that. But likely to not be in the lineup at the end of the game, assuming it's a competitive game. That's the other thing to keep in mind when I talk about pinch hit risk too. It's mostly me just trying to make you aware of the guys that could be subbed out early. It's not a guarantee that they're going to sub out because teams, one, just don't always do it, especially at like the first right-handed reliever that comes in. But also it depends on how the game's going. If the Red Sox are getting killed by the Orioles or the Red Sox are blowing out the Orioles, then the Red Sox are going to be less inclined to care about who is hitting, with one out in the seventh inning of a 10-1 game. It doesn't matter. Just give Abreu the full day off, give Yoshida the full day off, let these right-handed bats keep going. But if it's like a 3-2 game or 4-3 game or 9-8 game, whatever, in the seventh inning, and the Orioles bring in whatever shitty right-handed reliever they bring in this hypothetical, there is a good chance that Yoshida or Abreu is coming off the bench. So, it's not a lock, but it is important, I think, just to kind of keep those things in mind, especially when you're talking about popular plays, because the incentive to find ways not to play popular guys is just greater than it is to find reasons not to play low-owned guys. So I do think that's important to keep in mind. Tommy Edman not really showing up a lot for me again. Just seems like the Dodgers and Mets are the two teams that I'm not getting as much as the field, with the exception of Shohei Ohtani, which also makes me go back. The Dodgers were the team I'm getting third most overall as far as stacks, but I only have 3% 5-man Dodger stacks. I have 13% 2-mans, 3% 3-man. So basically, when you're seeing Dodger stacks here, what it means is Shohei Ohtani plus one other guy on the Dodgers, apparently, is what I'm doing there. And I do think that makes sense, just given the ownership that they're getting. It creates a situation where obviously I want to play a lot of Ohtani. Like, I want to play Ohtani more than I want to play any individual hitter on any other team. He's just the best guy on the slate and pretty much any slate he plays on. But if I'm stacking like Cleveland, like I don't want to play a lot of like 5-man Dodger stacks, 3-man Cleveland, or 5-man Cleveland, 3-man Dodgers, or whatever. I want to just kind of get Ohtani in there and then find ways to offset the ownership somewhere else. So that does kind of limit how much full Dodger stacks I can play, if that makes sense. So that's probably why I'm not getting there as much. Mookie, I'm coming in under the field by a little bit. Again, obviously, if you want to play Mookie and just be different somewhere else, go for it. He's great. No problems. But Ohtani, the very clear priority for me from that team. So to recap, getting to primarily Rodon, Festa, and Detmers at pitcher. And then dropping off a little bit to Povich, Buehler, Cantillo, Singer. I did think that the way I'm handling these three value pitchers was interesting. Basically playing Povich at a similar rate to the field is likely to play Cantillo, and then Cantillo at a similar rate to Povich. So kind of just flipping those guys, which I think makes sense. Cantillo projects a little bit better, but range of outcomes is very, very similar. So happy to see that. I don't think there's any questions that I missed. So if you have anything last minute, get those in. But otherwise, I'm going to get out of here and start rebuilding lineups and making those adjustments that I said I needed to make. So if there's no other questions, thanks for checking out the show. Hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, sign up for my Showdown, NFL Showdown stuff, also NFL main slate stuff, but not relevant for today, using the links in the description below. Thanks again for checking out the show. I will see you back here at the same time.